In a recent interview, former President Barack Obama predicted that Joe Biden will have a smooth journey to the 2024 Democratic presidential nomination.
I think Joe Biden has done an extraordinary job leading the country through some very difficult times. I do not think that there's going to be any kind of serious primary challenge to Joe Biden. I think the Democratic Party is unified. There was a lot of talk. You'll remember when he was first elected, because Bernie Sanders had run, that somehow there was this huge split between progressive Democrats and more centrist Democrats. And the truth is that partly because of how Joe is governed, those divisions have been bridged.
Joining us now to weigh in is host of the Sabby Sabs podcast, Sabrina Salvati. Welcome back, Sabrina.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right. Now, to the extent that Barack Obama might be right that it will be a cakewalk for Joe Biden to the White House, is it because the Bernie coalition has been won over by how Joe Biden has governed? Or is it because the DNC is basically deciding that Joe Biden will be the candidate without debates, reordering the primary schedule and all of those kinds of things that might be described subjectively as rigging?
I think it's because the DNC has already decided that Joe Biden is going to be the candidate. A lot of people that came from the Bernie Sanders movement do not support Joe Biden for re-election. 70% of Democratic voters don't want Joe Biden to run again. But Barack Obama is saying the quiet part out loud here. He's letting the American people know that the Democratic Party and the DNC select the candidate that they want. Barack Obama was also selected. That's why he was able to get into the White House. I think people need to take a look back and revisit the DNC fraud lawsuit, because one of the things that DNC attorney Bruce Spiva was able to argue was that the Democratic Party is a corporation, and that they actually do not owe you a fair election process. Now, this was actually after Bernie Sanders lost to Hillary Clinton in 2016. He was cheated, obviously. Bernie Sanders won every county in West Virginia, and the superdelegates decided to give West Virginia to Hillary Clinton anyway. Those are just one of the examples that happened during that campaign. But I think this should be a big wake-up call to the American people. And I know attorneys Jared Beck and Elizabeth Beck, they fought really hard against this and pushed back against what the DNC did in this type of rigging. But unfortunately, the court decided that they have every right to do that because they are a corporation. So I wish more Americans knew about that. It's really unfortunate that this happens. And I think Barack Obama, he will be a tool that is used once again come 2024 to fear shame people and voter shame people and tell them you got to get on board and vote for Joe Biden.
What former President Obama was also saying there was that there's no real reason for a challenge, especially a progressive challenge, because of the way Biden has governed, and that it's all hunky-dory, everybody's getting along, everybody on the left is or should be so happy with what Joe Biden has done that any actual effort to oppose him would be in bad faith. Does that track with how you, a self-described person on the left, feel about how the first Biden term has gone?
Not at all, Robbie. And when I'm out on the street talking to the people, the American people, particularly working class people, do not feel that Joe Biden has done a good job. The homelessness rate has increased since Joe Biden's presidency. We still have to deal with inflation. That hasn't gone away. Then we have this conflict with Russia and Ukraine, which happened under his presidency, not under Donald Trump's presidency. Economically, the American people, particularly working class people, are not doing okay. Now, though Joe Biden wants people to believe that just because he created more jobs, that means everything's okay. They never tell you what these jobs are. They never tell you if they're full-time, if they're part-time, if these jobs include full-time benefits, if they're contract positions. A lot of the positions here in Massachusetts are contract jobs with no benefits. They never tell you what they are. And I think that people like Bernie Sanders coming out very early on to support and endorse Joe Biden, I think that was a big mistake. But I also feel like Bernie Sanders and other members of the squad had already been told you have to get on board with Joe Biden, or you could risk losing your seat, or this could affect your political career. And that's how it works. It's really unfortunate to see that you do have people that are challenging Joe Biden, that are running on some of these progressive issues that those politicians actually champion, and they're not willing to support them. I think that's very revealing to people.
You mentioned earlier the threat of a spoiler effect being used by people like Barack Obama to encourage people to go ahead and vote for Joe Biden, even if he isn't their first choice. I want to play you a clip from leading liberal podcast Pod Save America, where they made this argument pretty forcefully, and get you to respond.
If the people who voted for Jill Stein, just Jill Stein, in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania had voted for Hillary instead, Donald Trump would have never become president. That's it, right? And so, I'm sure there's a lot of Cornel West fans out there. You live in a swing state, you vote for Cornel West, you're helping Trump become president. That's it. And you can say, oh, well, it's Joe Biden's fault, he did this or that. No. It's your decision. You get to decide whether you want to help Donald Trump become president or you don't. And if you want to help him, then you should vote for Cornel West, or you should vote for Joe Manchin and his no labels ticket, or you can vote for, RFK Jr. if he decides to run third party. But if you don't want to help Trump become president, you got to vote for Joe Biden. That's it. Very simple.
Now, I want to complicate that a little bit first with a quote from an article by Malika Jabali, I believe from 2017, where she looked at the voter count in Wisconsin, and she wrote, in Wisconsin, the decline in black voter turnout between 2012 and 2016 was 86,830 votes. Hillary Clinton lost the state by a mere 22,748 votes. Like a third of those votes. If Clinton won over more of the black Democrats who voted in 2012 in just 3 states, Wisconsin, Florida, and Michigan, she would have won the election. Now, all of that being said, what do you make of what John Favreau was arguing in that clip?
The voter shaming is really not going to help Joe Biden win. I wish people understood this. It's interesting to me that they always mention Jill Stein, but they don't mention Gary Johnson, as if Jill Stein was the only candidate that ran third party. The people that came out and voted for Jill Stein did not want to vote for Hillary Clinton. If the option was to vote for Jill Stein or stay home, those people would have stayed home. And that's what people like Pod Save America, that's what they have to understand. Same thing with people who voted for Gary Johnson, similar situation. We fast forward to 2020 election. You had Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker, but you also had Spike Cohen and Joe Jorgensen on the Libertarian ticket as well. If you look at the numbers, what people have to understand is if you wholeheartedly want to vote for Hillary Clinton or for Joe Biden, you are going to vote for them. You are not going to vote for the third party candidate. But those people didn't want to. So voter shaming people who chose to vote third party, I think this is really ridiculous at this point. These are old, draconian, type of thinking. And I say this because why do we have to be pigeonholed into one or two parties? You look at other countries and they have multiple parties, and this isn't even an issue. So I think Pod Save America, you have to understand, they smeared the Bernie Sanders campaign. AOC chose to go onto Pod Save America, right? The podcast that smeared that Bernie's campaign. They are not there to support or promote any type of disruption or any type of radical politics. They are there to keep you in the Democratic Party. And that's what people have to understand. We're going to see more of this as we get closer and closer to 2024.
Yeah, so what you just said is so true. I voted for Gary Johnson and then Joe Jorgensen. I wouldn't have voted for either of the two major party candidates unless if they had adopted totally different policies that aligned with my views, then maybe I would have voted for them. But they're so far removed from that, it wasn't really going to be in contention.
And more people, the Libertarian candidates are always more successful, frankly, than the Green Party candidates. So if we were to cancel out all of the third party votes, it would mean, given that more Libertarians are more right-leaning and Green Party is more left-leaning, that even if all the Green Party people voted for Democrats and all of the Libertarians voted for Republicans, that would mean Republicans benefited from that canceling out. Not to mention, per Malika Jabali's article, there's been no interrogation of why all of those tens of thousands of black voters that could have swung the election for Hillary Clinton if they had turned out, who did vote for Barack Obama in 2012, chose to stay home, and absolutely no interrogation of the Democratic Party's own role in failing to campaign in some of those states in particular.
Correct. I mean, Hillary Clinton also ignored the Rust Belt. This was a big mistake, right? I mean, Bill Clinton knew to heavily campaign in the Rust Belt. He was able to win over that region of the country. she decided not to. She decided to cater to the areas where I felt she was already doing well in to begin with. You cannot ignore the working class, especially you're supposed to be a Democrat. You cannot ignore the working class and continue to expect them to come out and support you. And I think the 2016 election showed everyone that Donald Trump was not supposed to happen, but it did. So that should have been a wake-up call for people. But mark my words, as we go into 2024, you're going to hear more of this rhetoric about Cornel West, RFK Jr., Marianne Williamson. You're hearing some of it now, but it's going to get worse as we get into 2024. And I think it will be worse this time around than it was in 2020 because Joe Biden is doing so poorly. I just saw a video where he said Putin is not doing well in Iraq. Putin has nothing to do with Iraq. This is really weird. Like, obviously, he got the country wrong.
Yeah.
So there are big issues here with Joe Biden.
It's
Don't
scary.
even worry about that. What could go wrong?
Yeah, God save
We've
the
never made a
Queen.
huge mistake regarding Iraq before.
Look, one other point I wanted to mention before we close out here is just that it's worth noting from the debate rigging standpoint that on the Republican side, the standard for participation is polling at 1% and having 40,000 individual donors. Marianne Williamson is polling at 8 or 9%. RFK Jr. obviously has been holding steady at around 20%. And yet Democrats seem very confident in coming out and saying that there is no need for any kind of debate. There's a real democracy gap, it seems, between the parties that I think the voters are going to be able to discern. We'll see how that turns out for the Democratic Party in the long run. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sabby.
Thank you.